The janitor who was actually a war hero. What if I told you that the person cleaning your school gym might actually be a secret superhero? Well, that's exactly what happened at one of America's toughest military training centers. This is the crazy, true story of a janitor who shocked everyone when they found out who he really was. Hey janitor, you missed a spot over there. I'll do it right away. You'll do it right now. For 15 years, a quiet black janitor was made fun of at a special military gym. But then someone saw the tattoo on his neck, and everything changed. Thomas "Tank" Washington had been mopping floors and emptying trash cans at the Navy SEAL Training Center for 15 years. He was like a ghost to the tough warriors training there. They barely noticed he existed. The young Navy SEALs only saw a quiet black man wearing janitor clothes. They had no idea he was actually a legendary Marine whose secret missions had saved many, many lives. But when a mean trainee pushed too far, and a tough instructor saw the faded tattoo on Tank's neck, the most exclusive military gym in America was about to learn something amazing. Sometimes heroes don't wear fancy uniforms. Sometimes they carry mop buckets. It was very early morning at the Navy base in California. The salty ocean air promised another really hard training day. Inside the Special Training Center's main gym, bright lights buzzed on. They lit up rows of exercise equipment that had made some of America's toughest warriors. The smell of sweat, rubber, and hard work hung in the air like smoke in a church of getting stronger. Thomas Washington pushed his cleaning cart through the maze of weight machines and pull-up bars. He moved quietly and smoothly. At 58 years old, he had learned how to be invisible. He kept his head down, eyes on his work, staying in the empty spaces between other people's conversations. His janitor uniform hung loose on his still strong body. It hid muscles that had once carried him through jungles and deserts where making a mistake meant death. Tank, as people used to call him in his old life, had been cleaning this gym for 15 years. He had watched thousands of young men try to become Navy SEALs. He saw the strongest ones break under pressure. He saw unlikely heroes rise to greatness. He knew every piece of equipment, every corner where tired trainees fell down, every spot where blood and tears had hit the floor. The first group of SEAL trainees started coming in at 5 a.m. Their faces showed they were ready to go through hell. Tank recognized that look. He had worn it himself 35 years ago, though in a different uniform, in a different war. These young warriors barely noticed he was there. They stepped around him like he was just furniture. "Excuse me?" one really arrogant trainee said. He didn't even bother looking at Tank as he moved his cart. "Can you clean somewhere else? We're trying to train here." Tank just nodded and wheeled his cart to the far corner. He started cleaning the free weights methodically. He had learned long ago that being proud was something he couldn't afford. This job paid his bills, gave him health insurance, and most importantly, kept him close to the brotherhood he used to belong to, even if that brotherhood didn't recognize him anymore. The faded tattoo on his neck was usually hidden under his collar, but it caught the light as he bent down to pick up a dropped towel. Semper Fidelis was wrapped around a skull wearing a green hat, with small numbers underneath that told the story of secret operations spanning 20 years. But the young SEALs were too busy looking at themselves in the mirror to notice the history walking among them. As the morning went on, and the gym filled with the sounds of metal hitting metal and men pushing beyond their limits, Tank continued his quiet work, invisible and forgotten. Exactly the way he had learned to survive in a world that had moved on without him. The trouble started like most fights do, with a moment of mean cruelty disguised as a joke. Petty Officer Jake Morrison was 23 years old. He thought he was invincible after making it through the hardest part of SEAL training. He was showing off near the bench press, telling stories to other trainees who hung on his every word about his weekend adventures in San Diego. "So there, I am, right," Morrison said, adding another weight plate to the bar. "This girl asks what I do for a living, and I tell her I'm a Navy SEAL. Well, technically SEAL in training, but who's counting? She's all impressed, asking about my missions." The group laughed, their voices carrying across the gym. Tank kept mopping nearby. His presence was as unremarkable as the equipment itself. But he was listening. Old habits from spy work never die. "Point is," Morrison continued, "girls love the uniform. They want a real warrior, not some—" He waved dismissively toward Tank without really looking at him. "Not some janitor who probably never served a day in his life." One of the other trainees, slightly less obnoxious than Morrison, glanced uncomfortably at Tank. "Dude, maybe keep it down? Why? It's not like he can understand what we're talking about anyway." Morrison's voice grew louder, encouraged by his audience. "Probably doesn't even speak English that well." Tank's grip tightened on the mop handle, but his face stayed calm. He had heard worse, much worse, and learned that fighting back only made things worse. Better to finish his work and move to another section. But Morrison wasn't finished. As Tank pushed his cart past a bench press, the young trainee deliberately stepped in his way. "Hey janitor, you missed a spot over there." He pointed to a perfectly clean section of floor. "I'll get to it," Tank said quietly. His voice had the slight roughness of someone who had breathed too much smoke and sand in faraway places. "You'll get to it now," Morrison said, puffing out his chest with borrowed authority. "That's what we pay you for, right? To clean up after real warriors." The gym had grown quiet. Other trainees stopped their workouts to watch the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, others amused, but none stepped in to help. Tank had seen this before. Pack mentality. The need to show dominance by humiliating someone they thought was weaker. "There's no spot," Tank said calmly, not moving from his position. "Are you arguing with me?" Morrison stepped closer, using his height to loom over the older man. "Maybe you need to learn some respect for the people who actually serve this country." That's when Master Chief Petty Officer Samuel Rodriguez entered the gym. His weathered face scanned the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 30 years managing young warriors and their egos. Rodriguez was a legend in the SEAL community. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, more secret operations than most people had hot dinners. "What's the situation here?" Rodriguez's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Morrison straightened, suddenly aware that his audience had grown to include someone whose opinion actually mattered. "Just having a discussion with the cleaning staff, Master Chief? Nothing serious." Rodriguez's gaze shifted to Tank, and for the first time, he really looked at the man he had seen cleaning the gym for years. His eyes traveled from Tank's face down to his neck, where the collar of his uniform had shifted to reveal the edge of that faded tattoo. The Master Chief's expression changed. His eyes narrowed as he processed what he was seeing. "Tank," he said quietly, using a name that hadn't been spoken in this gym for 15 years. "Thomas Washington, Force Recon, 2nd Battalion." The silence that followed was deafening. The recognition hit the gym like a flashbang grenade. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped closer to Tank, his eyes fixed on the tattoo that was now fully visible as Tank's collar had shifted during the confrontation. The skull wearing a green hat wasn't just any Marine Corps tattoo. It was specific to Force Reconnaissance, the Marines' elite special operations unit. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, his voice carrying a respect that made every trainee in the gym stop what they were doing. "You're Tank, Washington." "The Tank, Washington." Morrison looked confused, his tough guy act deflating as he sensed the shift in atmosphere. "Master Chief, I don't understand." "Shut up, Morrison," Rodriguez said without taking his eyes off Tank. "Do you have any idea who you just disrespected?" Tank straightened slightly, old military posture asserting itself despite the janitor's uniform. "That was a long time ago, Master Chief. Different life." "Bullshit," Rodriguez said, his voice growing stronger. "You don't stop being who you are just because you change jobs." He turned to address the gathered trainees, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Gentlemen, you're in the presence of a living legend. Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Tank Washington, Force Recon, 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 in Grenada, secret operations in Central America that are still classified." The young SEALs looked between their instructor and the man they had dismissed as just a janitor, confusion written across their faces. Morrison's mouth hung open like a fish, gasping for air. Rodriguez wasn't finished. "Tank here has more confirmed kills than most of you will ever see enemies. He's been behind enemy lines in places that don't exist on maps, doing operations that officially never happened. The man you just called a fake warrior has a Navy Cross, 2 silver stars, and a Purple Heart with 3 clusters." "I don't understand," one of the trainees said quietly. "If he's all that, why is he cleaning our gym?" Rodriguez finished the thought. "Because sometimes life doesn't give heroes the endings they deserve. Because sometimes the system fails the people who served it best. Because sometimes a man needs work, and honest work is nothing to be ashamed of." Tank had remained silent during Rodriguez's impromptu biography, but now he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Master Chief, with respect, these young men don't need to hear old war stories. They've got their own battles to fight." "No," Rodriguez said firmly. "They need to hear this. They need to understand what real service looks like." He gestured to the assembled trainees. "You think you're tough because you made it through Hell Week? Tank here spent 6 months behind enemy lines in Cambodia, living off insects and rainwater, calling in airstrikes on his own position to avoid capture." The story that emerged over the next hour transformed the gym from a place of casual arrogance into something approaching a shrine. Other instructors had gathered, drawn by the commotion, and several recognized Tank's name from classified briefings and whispered legends. Chief Warrant Officer Maria Santos, one of the few female instructors at the facility, approached with tears in her eyes. "My father served with you in Grenada. He used to tell stories about a Marine who could carry a wounded man 5 miles through enemy territory without stopping." "Your father was Carlos Santos?" Tank asked, his stoic expression cracking slightly. "Hell of a soldier. How is he?" 2 years ago, cancer from Agent Orange exposure, but he never stopped talking about his time with Force Recon, never stopped talking about you." The revelation rippled through the assembled group. These weren't just stories, they were family histories, connections to a brotherhood that transcended rank and service branch. Tank wasn't just a janitor. He was a living link to the warriors who had paved the way for their own service. Morrison, who had started this confrontation with his casual cruelty, stood frozen in the center of the group. His face had gone pale as the magnitude of his disrespect became clear. When Tank finally looked at him, the young trainee seemed to shrink into himself. "Son," Tank said quietly, "you want to be a warrior?" Real warriors don't need to tear others down to build themselves up. They lift people up. They protect the weak, not prey on them. I'm sorry, Morrison stammered. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't bother to look, Tank interrupted, not unkindly. Every person you meet is fighting battles you can't see, carrying burdens you can't imagine. A real SEAL, a real warrior, remembers that. Master Chief Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Tank, would you be willing to share some of your experiences with these men? Not the classified stuff, but the lessons, the mindset that kept you alive when others didn't make it home? Tank looked around the gym, seeing it with new eyes. For 15 years, he had been invisible here, forgotten and dismissed. Now, suddenly, he was being asked to step back into the light, to reclaim a piece of the identity he thought was lost forever. I suppose I could spare a few minutes, he said, setting down his mop for the first time in years. Not because his shift was over, but because he had something more important to do. The transformation in the gym's atmosphere lasted exactly 3 days. Tank had begun sharing stories during his breaks, teaching lessons about mental toughness and tactical thinking that couldn't be found in any manual. The trainees hung on his every word, and even the instructors found themselves learning from his decades of experience. But on Thursday morning, everything changed. Tank arrived at work to find his supervisor, Harold Brennan, waiting by his locker, with a grim expression and a manila folder. Brennan was a former Navy logistics officer who had taken the civilian facilities management job after retirement. A man who understood military hierarchy but had never seen combat himself. Washington, we need to talk, Brennan said, his voice carrying the uncomfortable authority of someone delivering bad news. In the small office next to the supply closet, Brennan opened the folder to reveal a formal complaint. I've received reports that you've been misrepresenting yourself to the trainees, claiming to be some kind of war hero, disrupting training schedules with unauthorized storytelling sessions. Tank's jaw tightened. I never claimed anything. Master Chief Rodriguez recognized me and asked me to share some experiences. That's not how the complaint reads, Brennan said, sliding the paper across his desk. According to this, you've been telling elaborate war stories, possibly made up, and interfering with official training protocols. The complaint was signed by Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, the base's executive officer, a career administrator who had never served in a combat role but wielded considerable bureaucratic power. Tank had seen her type before, officers who advanced through politics rather than performance, threatened by anyone whose real experience might expose their own limitations. There's more, Brennan continued reluctantly. She's questioning your background check from when you were hired. Wants to verify your military service, your discharge status, your security clearance history. Tank felt a familiar chill run down his spine. His military records were complicated. Decades of classified operations meant that much of his service history was sealed or blacked out. To someone looking for reasons to discredit him, the gaps in his official record would look suspicious rather than classified. Harold, Tank said carefully, you know I've been a good employee for 15 years. Never missed a day, never caused problems, always did my job. I know that, Tom. But Hayes has the ear of the base commander, and she's making noise about stolen valor and security risks. She wants you suspended pending a full investigation. The irony was bitter. Tank had spent his career in the shadows, conducting operations that would never be acknowledged, earning decorations that would never be publicly displayed. Now that same secrecy was being used as a weapon against him. Over the next week, the investigation proceeded with the ruthless efficiency of military bureaucracy. Tank was barred from the gym while investigators pored over his personnel files. The trainees who had been inspired by his stories were warned not to discuss the matter. Master Chief Rodriguez was formally reprimanded for allowing unauthorized personnel to interfere with training protocols. The worst part was the whispers. Without Tank there to defend himself, rumors began to spread. Maybe he really was a fraud. Maybe the stories were made up. Maybe he had been playing an elaborate con game for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to claim false glory. Morrison, the trainee whose initial disrespect had started everything, found himself in an impossible position. Part of him wanted to defend Tank, but another part wondered if he had been fooled by a clever imposter. The doubt ate at him like acid. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, the instructor whose father had served with Tank, refused to let the matter rest. She reached out through her own military contacts, eventually connecting with a retired Marine colonel named James Mitchell, who had commanded force recon operations in the 1980s. Mitchell's response was immediate and explosive. Tank Washington. Jesus, that man saved my life in Nicaragua. If someone's questioning his service record, they're either ignorant or malicious. Probably both. But even Mitchell's testimony wasn't enough. The classified nature of Tank's operations meant that official confirmation would require security clearances and bureaucratic processes that could take months. Lieutenant Commander Hayes seemed content to let the investigation drag on indefinitely. effectively ending Tank's career through administrative limbo. The crisis reached its peak when Tank received a certified letter informing him that his security clearance was being reviewed. His veterans' benefits were under investigation, and he was being considered for prosecution under the Stolen Valor Act, a law designed to punish people who falsely claimed military honors. Sitting in his small apartment, surrounded by the few mementos he had kept from his military service, Tank realized that his past had finally caught up with him. Not the enemy bullets or the classified operations, but the bureaucratic machinery of the very institution he had served faithfully for 2 decades. For the first time in years, the invisible janitor felt truly defeated. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jolting Tank from the restless sleep that had become his norm since the investigation began. The voice on the other end was gravelly, authoritative, and completely unexpected. Gunnery Sergeant Washington, this is General Marcus Stone, Commandant of the Marine Corps. I believe we need to talk. Tank sat up in bed, his mind racing. The Commandant, the highest-ranking Marine in the Corps, didn't make personal phone calls to retired gunnery sergeants, especially ones facing stolen valor accusations. Sir, I think there might be some mistake. No mistake, Marine. I've been following your situation through some very concerned friends. Can you be at Pendleton by 2 p.m. today? I'm flying in specifically to meet with you. 3 hours later, Tank found himself in the back of a staff car heading to Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, wearing his only suit and carrying a folder containing every piece of documentation he could find related to his service. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the surreal nature of the situation at Pendleton. He was escorted to a conference room where General Stone waited, along with 2 other men Tank didn't recognize. Stone was a legend in the Corps, a combat veteran who had risen through the ranks based on merit rather than politics, respected by every Marine who had ever served under him. Gunnery Sergeant Washington, Stone said, standing to shake Tank's hand. Thank you for coming. I'd like you to meet Colonel James Mitchell, whom I believe you know, and Mr. David Chen from the Department of Defense. Mitchell stepped forward with a smile that erased 30 years. Tank, you magnificent bastard. You look exactly the same, just grayer. The reunion was brief but emotional. Mitchell had indeed been the young lieutenant Tank had carried to safety during a classified operation in Nicaragua, and his gratitude had never dimmed. But it was Chen who provided the real surprise. Mr. Washington, Chen said, opening a thick briefcase. I'm with the Defense Intelligence Agency. For the past week, I've been conducting a comprehensive review of your service record at the General's request. What I found is remarkable. The documents Chen spread across the table told a story that even Tank had forgotten in its entirety. Commendations from operations he barely remembered. After-action reports praising his leadership and tactical brilliance. Letters from commanding officers recommending him for decorations that had been classified too highly to be awarded publicly. Your official record shows 22 years of exemplary service, Chen continued, but your classified record shows something else entirely. You participated in 47 covert operations across 6 countries. Your actions directly saved the lives of over 200 American personnel. You've been recommended for the Medal of Honor 3 separate times, but the operations were too sensitive for public recognition. General Stone leaned forward. Tank, the reason your records look incomplete isn't because you're a fraud. It's because you're one of the most highly classified Marines in Corps history. Half your service record is locked in vaults that most generals don't have access to. The irony was staggering. Tank's greatest weakness in the current investigation, the gaps in his official record, was actually proof of his most significant service to his country. There's more, Chen said, pulling out a final folder. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the officer who initiated this investigation, she's been flagged by Navy intelligence for potential security violations. Turns out she's been accessing classified personnel files without proper authorization, possibly selling information to private military contractors. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Hayes hadn't been trying to expose a fraud. She had been trying to discredit someone whose real record might expose her own criminal activities. General Stone stood, his expression grim with purpose. Gentlemen, we have a situation that requires immediate action. Tank, I'm personally flying to Coronado tomorrow to address this matter. I want you there with me. The next morning, the Naval Special Warfare Training Center experienced something unprecedented. A surprise visit from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, accompanied by a DIA investigator and the janitor who had been banned from the premises. For 2 weeks, the assembled crowd in the main gym included every instructor, most of the current trainee class, and base command staff who had been summoned on short notice. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood near the back, her face pale as she realized her carefully constructed investigation was about to collapse. General Stone took the podium with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to address a grave injustice that has been perpetrated against one of the finest Marines I've ever had the privilege to know. What followed was a 20-minute presentation that systematically destroyed every accusation against Tank. Chen provided documentation of his service record. Michu testified to his character and combat effectiveness. Stone himself read from classified after-action reports that painted Tank as a warrior scholar whose tactical innovations had been adopted throughout the special operations community. The man you've been treating as a suspected fraud, Stone concluded, is actually one of the most decorated Marines of his generation. His service to this country spans 2 decades and 6 continents. His actions have saved hundreds of American lives and prevented countless enemy operations. The silence that followed was broken by Master Chief Rodriguez, who stepped forward and rendered a perfect salute. Gunnery Sergeant Washington, it's an honor to serve in the same corps as you, sir. One by one, every Marine and sailor in the room came to attention and saluted. The trainees who had dismissed him as just a janitor now saw him for what he had. I've always been a warrior whose service had paved the way for their own. Morrison, the trainee whose disrespect had started this entire chain of events, approached Tank with tears in his eyes. Gunny, I owe you an apology that I can never fully make, but I want you to know I'll spend the rest of my career trying to be half the Marine you are. Tank looked around the gym where he had worked in anonymity for 15 years, now filled with the respect and recognition he had never sought but had always deserved. Son, he said to Morrison, you already are. You just needed to remember that being a warrior isn't about the uniform you wear, it's about the character you carry. 6 months later, Tank Washington stood before a different kind of audience. The auditorium at the Naval War College was packed with senior officers, military historians, and special operations personnel from all branches of service. He wore his dress blue uniform for the first time in 25 years, his chest heavy with ribbons that told the story of a career spent in the shadows. The lecture series had been General Stone's idea, lessons from the silent service, classified operations, and their impact on modern warfare. Tank had initially resisted a lifetime of secrecy, wasn't easily abandoned, but the declassification of several of his operations had made it possible to share experiences that could benefit the next generation of warriors. The most important lesson I can share, Tank told the assembled officers, is that heroism isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right when no one is watching, when no one will ever know, when the only reward is the knowledge that you serve something greater than yourself. The Naval Special Warfare Training Center had undergone its own transformation. Tank now split his time between facilities, maintenance, and serving as a senior instructor for the SEAL training program. His classes on mental resilience and tactical thinking had become legendary, with waiting lists of officers wanting to learn from the man they now called the Ghost of Force Recon. Lieutenant Commander Hayes had been court-martialed and sentenced to 5 years in military prison for espionage and fraud. Her investigation had inadvertently exposed a network of officers who had been selling classified information to defense contractors, a security breach that reached into the highest levels of military command. Morrison had graduated from BUD/S with honors and specifically requested assignment to a unit where he could put Tank's teachings into practice. Before deploying to Afghanistan, he had visited Tank one last time. Gunny, he had said, I want you to know that everything I accomplish out there, I owe to the lesson you taught me in that gym. Real warriors lift people up. As Tank finished his lecture at the War College, a young female officer raised her hand. Sir, what advice would you give to someone just starting their military career? Tank smiled, thinking of all the young faces he had seen come and go over the decades. Some who had made it, others who hadn't, all of them carrying the same hopes and fears he had once carried. Remember that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, he said. Treat them with respect, learn from their experience, and never assume that the uniform makes the warrior. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones you never see coming. The standing ovation that followed wasn't for the decorated Marine or the legendary operator. It was for the quiet janitor who had taught them all that true strength comes not from what you've done, but from how you treat others when you think no one is watching.